Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Because sometimes silence is louder than a shout. Petty Officer First Class Ridley Cass stood in the back corner of the cramped briefing room aboard the USS Michael Monser, her back straight, hands behind her, jaw still. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, mixing with the low rumble of the ship's engines. Salt, oil, and burnt coffee hung heavy in the air. At the front of the room, Captain Marcus Viener leaned over the mission map. He didn't whisper his words. He said them loud enough for every man in the room to hear. "You're just a girl playing soldier." The sentence cut through the room like a blade. The other operators went still. Some avoided her eyes. Some smirked. Viener didn't look away. His smirk was the kind you get from someone who's already made up their mind, the kind that dares you to argue. Ridley didn't move, didn't blink. Inside, her pulse was calm, not because the words didn't sting, but because they always did. She learned how to let them cut, bleed, and heal all in the same breath. 4 years. 4 years of proving herself again and again, in mud, in surf, in firefights. 4 years since she'd clawed through Bud S when most of her class didn't make it. She'd earned her trident with the kind of grit that left scars on the soul. But it didn't matter, not to men like Viener, not yet. The mission briefing continued, voices droning over the sound of waves slapping the hull. A Liberian-flagged cargo vessel, MV Arcturus, had gone silent 40 nautical miles off Somalia. Last transmission, possible hijacking, armed hostiles, unknown number of hostages. The team would insert by helicopter under cover of darkness, fast rope to the deck, clear the vessel, secure survivors. Simple on paper, deadly in practice. Ridley's role, breacher and cross-trained marksman. Viener's tone made sure everyone knew what he thought about that. "This isn't a classroom drill," he said. "We need strength, speed, and split-second decision-making. One hesitation, one mistake, and people die." Then he paused, eyes landing on Ridley. "Some people just aren't built for that kind of pressure." Lieutenant Hale, the team leader, didn't hesitate. "She's neutralized more threats under contact than anyone here. Fastest breacher we've got." Viener crossed his arms. "On paper, paper doesn't bleed." The room went quiet again. Ridley said nothing. Because words don't change minds. Results do. When the briefing ended, the team scattered. Gear checks, loadouts, quiet rituals before a storm. Ridley stayed behind for a moment, her reflection faint in the glass viewport, black ocean stretching beyond. She'd been here before. The doubt, the eyes, the silence. Every new unit, every new operation, the same unspoken question. Can she really do it? She stopped trying to answer it long ago. She just made sure they'd never have to ask twice. That night she stood alone on the flight deck. The wind bit cold against her face, the stars sharp and bright above the dark water. Somewhere far off, lightning flickered near the horizon, silent and distant. She thought about Alaska. About her father. He used to say the ocean didn't care about your feelings, only your hands. She learned early what it meant to fight through pain, through cold, through fear. At 12, she could gut a king salmon faster than most deckhands twice her age. Her father never praised her for it. He just nodded once and said, "Good, now do it again." When she joined the Navy at 19, her mother cried. Her father didn't. He just said, "Don't come back halfway." Halfway. That word lived in her bones. Ridley had seen men twice her size break under the weight of Bud S. She remembered Hell Week, the surf zone, the cold, the instructors yelling. She'd been so cold her teeth rattled like shells in her skull. She wanted to quit. The bell was right there, a few steps away. But she'd pictured her father on that stormy day in Alaska, standing behind her while she steered the boat through 10-foot waves. He hadn't touched the wheel, just told her, calm as death, "Fear's fine, kid. Just don't let it make you stupid." She didn't ring the bell. She never would. Now, years later, she stood on another deck, staring into another storm. Only this time the cold came from the people around her, not the sea. Below deck she could hear laughter, the kind that always followed locker room talk. Someone cracked a joke. The others laughed too loud. It wasn't hard to guess the target. Ridley exhaled slowly and adjusted her rifle sling. It wasn't anger she felt, not really. It was something quieter, something heavier. The exhaustion of knowing she had to be twice as perfect just to be seen as equal. She thought about quitting before. Not the Navy, just the noise, the proving, the constant fight to be believed. But then she'd remember the next woman who'd come after her, and how her performance would decide that woman's chances before she ever spoke. Ridley straightened her shoulders and turned back toward the interior hatch. Duty first. Inside, the air was heavy with sweat and oil. The team was checking gear under the red glow of emergency lights. Lieutenant Hale gave her a nod, the kind that meant he trusted her. That was enough. Hours later, the call came. Launch in 5. The helicopter rotors spun to life, chopping through the night. Ridley climbed aboard, took her seat near the open door, her rifle across her knees. No one talked. There was nothing left to say. The Arcturus appeared on the horizon, a ghost of steel against the Black Sea. No lights, no signals, just silence. Ridley watched through night vision as the shape grew larger. It was too still, too quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't trust you back. 30 seconds, the crew chief shouted. Ridley pulled on her gloves. Her heartbeat was steady, her breathing slow. The others were focused, but she could feel Vienna's stare even through the darkness, the weight of his doubt pressing like gravity. She ignored it. The only thing that mattered now was the job. The MH-60 hovered over the deck, wash blasting salt spray into the air. The crew chief dropped the fast rope. Go. Hale first, then 2 others, then Ridley. She gripped the rope, stepped into the night, and slid down 40 feet in 3 seconds flat. Boots hit steel, hard. She unhooked, weapon up, scanning. The deck was slick with salt and oil. No movement, no sound except the helicopter banking away. Hale's voice came through comms, "Stack on the hatch." Ridley moved into position, feeling the vibrations of her pulse in her gloves. She placed the breaching charge, a thin strip of C6, precise, quiet. "Charge set," she whispered. "Clear for breach." The blast cracked sharp and quick. Steel bent inward, the door sagged. They moved. Vast. Smooth. Ridley went second through the doorway, sweeping the narrow corridor. Red light painted everything like a wound. The air smelled of rust and something else, blood. They cleared forward, one compartment at a time. The sound of boots on metal, the creak of the ship in the current, her breathing in her ears. Then gunfire. From above. Rounds punched through the thin ceiling, sparks bouncing off the walls. "Contact upper deck," Hale shouted. The team scattered for cover. The ship was a maze, tight corners, echoing hallways, no visibility. Vienna's voice crackled over the comms from the destroyer. "You're taking too long. Hostiles are moving toward the engine room, possible explosives. If you can't control it, I'll call for air." "Air strikes. Hostages. Failure." Ridley froze, not in fear but calculation. Everyone was thinking like an assaulter. She thought like a fisherman. There were always other routes, the ones no one else saw. She broke from the formation. "I've got a better angle," she said over comms. "Cass, where the hell are you?" Hale's voice snapped, but she was already gone. She sprinted to the exterior ladder, cold steel, slick with mist. It led straight to the upper deck. Dangerous, exposed, perfect. She climbed fast, rifle slung, breath steady. Wind roared in her ears. From above she saw it, the bridge dim under moonlight, 2 silhouettes inside, rifles moving. She dropped prone behind a vent casing, unslung her weapon, and peered through the night vision scope. The world turned green and ghostly. She centered the reticle on the first figure. Exhaled. Pressed. One suppressed shot, soft and surgical. Target down. The second man spun. Too late. Another shot, another fall. She advanced, quiet, deliberate, precise. Inside the bridge, 3 crewmen, bound, terrified, alive. She cut them loose, whispered, "Stay down," and keyed her mic. Bridge secure, 3 hostages, no injuries. Copy, Hale replied, moving to engine room. It was almost over. Almost. But Ridley knew better. Missions like this never ended neatly. Something always stayed behind: a sound, a smell, a memory. When the last shot echoed and the team reassembled on deck, Vienna's voice came back through the headset, quiet this time. "Good work." No smirk, no sarcasm, just words, heavy, reluctant, real. But what came later, when the adrenaline faded, would be what changed everything. Because respect earned in silence lasts longer than words shouted in doubt. And somewhere in that dark sea, under the dying rotor wash of the helicopter, Ridley Cass realized something her father had always meant, but never said out loud. Fear was fine, doubt was fine, as long as it didn't make you stop. Why did his silence feel heavier than his insults? Ridley stood on the Michael Monser's flight deck, her helmet still in her hands, the sea wind pulling at her hair. The helicopter's engines whined down to silence. The rest of the team was unhooking, unloading, moving through their debriefing motions, muscle memory, routine. But Captain Marcus Vienna just stood there at the edge of the deck, arms folded, watching her. He didn't say a word. Not at first. The kind of silence that says you proved something, but I'll never admit it. Then finally, he nodded once. Slow, measured. "Good work," he said. Then he turned and walked away. No praise, no apology, just that. Ridley exhaled, setting her helmet down on the deck. For most people, that nod might have felt like victory. For her, it felt like the start of another fight. Because in this world, you could save lives and still not be believed. Hours later, in the ready room, the after-action report was already being typed up. Lieutenant Hale was walking the others through details. 2 hostiles neutralized by precision fire from the upper deck, Ridley's shots. 3 hostages secured. No friendly casualties. Mission time, 19 minutes from drop to secure. Clean, efficient, professional. Hale's voice carried calm authority. Cass's maneuver up the external ladder gave us the flank we needed. Without that angle, we'd still be guessing. Vienna leaned back in his chair at the corner of the room. She also left formation without direct command authorization. The air went tight. Ridley didn't look up from cleaning her weapon. She kept her eyes on the bolt assembly, methodically brushing carbon away. Hale didn't flinch. She made a call that saved hostages. That's initiative. Vienna's voice stayed low. Initiative's good. Insubordination gets people killed. The tension sat thick in the air, invisible, suffocating. Nobody spoke. Finally, Hale said, "You want to write it up, Captain, be my guest. But next time I'm taking her judgment over your paperwork." That ended it for now. Ridley didn't speak. She didn't need to. The results already had. But later that night, when the rest of the platoon had gone quiet, she sat alone in the gear bay, still half-dressed in her wetsuit, staring at her hands. Her fingers ached from the climb, the rope burned still red along her palms. She flexed them slowly, feeling every joint. She should have felt proud. Instead, she felt hollow. Because it wasn't just about the mission. It was about every moment like it that came before. Every time she had to prove she belonged in a place that men were handed by default. And the worst part, she didn't hate them for it. She understood it. That's what made it harder. She knew how soldiers thought, the unspoken brotherhood, the culture of suffering, the constant testing. She lived it, earned it, matched it blow for blow. But no matter how many walls she broke through, there was always another waiting behind it. The only thing that kept her steady was the memory of Alaska, of her father's quiet voice in the storm. "Fear's fine, just don't let it make you stupid." She whispered it to herself now, a small reminder, a ritual. That's when the door clanged open. Viener stepped in. His boots echoed on the steel deck. His eyes found her immediately. "Still up?" he asked. "Couldn't sleep." He smirked, not cruel but sharp. "That's what adrenaline does, makes you think too much." She didn't answer. He took a few steps closer, resting one hand on the bench beside her. "You went off script up there," he said. "You know that." "I know what I did," she said evenly. He studied her, his expression unreadable. "You realize if that ladder maneuver had gone wrong, we'd be writing your name on a memorial wall." She met his eyes. "And if I hadn't, we'd be writing theirs." A pause, the kind of pause that stretches thin just before something breaks. He nodded slightly, just enough to acknowledge the truth in her words, but then his voice dropped lower. "You're good, Cass, better than I expected, but don't mistake that for invincible." Ridley stood slowly. But I don't mistake doubt for leadership either." Something flickered across his face, respect maybe or anger, maybe both. He turned, exhaled, and said, "Get some rest." When he left, Ridley sat back down, staring at the empty doorway. Her pulse was steady again, not because she wasn't angry, but because she'd stopped letting anger drive her years ago. She learned that calm wasn't weakness, it was weaponized control. 2 days later, the Monster received new orders, a reconnaissance escort off the Yemeni coast. Low risk, routine, or that's what the paperwork said. But something about the brief felt wrong. The intelligence package was thin, vague, inconsistent. Hale even said it felt like someone upstairs was rushing it through. Still, orders were orders. The morning of departure, the team gathered in the hangar bay, prepping the RHIB for a coastal insertion. Ridley was securing gear when she heard Viener behind her, giving last-minute instructions. He sounded irritated, tighter than usual. "Comms discipline. No freelancing this time," he said, loud enough for her to hear. Ridley kept her eyes down, double-checking the breaching kit. "Understood, sir." The boat launched at dawn. The sky was still gray, the water glass-smooth. As they moved toward the coastline, the air changed, heavy, humid, carrying the faint smell of diesel and rot. Ridley adjusted her headset, scanning the horizon through binoculars. A small fishing vessel appeared off their starboard bow. No flag, no movement. "Unmarked skiff, 2 o'clock, she reported. Hale nodded, visual only, stay tight. They passed within 50 meters. Ridley caught a glimpse of a figure on board, thin, wrapped in cloth, holding something metallic. "Possible weapon," she said. Then the world erupted. A flash. A crack. And the RHIB's engine died instantly. "RPG," someone shouted. The explosion had missed barely. Water rained down in sheets. The skiff peeled away, engines screaming. The team returned fire, but the attackers were gone, swallowed by the coastline. The RHIB drifted, dead in the water. "Damage report," Hale barked. "Engine out, comms unstable." Viener's voice came over the headset, distorted. "Abort mission. Return to Monster now." But they couldn't. The engine wouldn't restart. That's when the second explosion hit. This one was smaller but closer. Something detonated under the hull. Improvised mine, maybe. The blast threw Ridley backward. She hit the deck hard, her head ringing. Everything went white. Then sound came rushing back. Cass, you good?" Her ears were bleeding, her vision blurred. She nodded weakly, pushing herself upright. The RHIB was half submerged now, the bow lifting, stern flooding. They had to abandon. "Over the side now." The cold shock of the sea snapped her senses back. She surfaced, coughing, scanning. Hale was already swimming toward the nearby reef line, guiding the others. The RHIB sank fast behind them. Ridley kicked hard, her gear weighing her down. Every breath was fire. They reached the reef, jagged coral, shallow water. The sun was coming up, painting the sea red-gold. The surviving team, 5 of them, crawled onto a narrow sandbar, panting, coughing seawater. Hale's voice was ragged. Status check. Everyone answered. Except one. Where's Vienna? They scanned the surf. Nothing, just debris and oil slick. Ridley's chest clenched. She didn't like him, but she wasn't built to leave anyone behind. I've got movement, she shouted, pointing to a dark shape drifting near the reef edge. Without waiting, she dove back in. The water was colder now, filled with debris. She swam hard, lungs burning, until she reached him. Vienna was face down, limp. She rolled him over, gasping as his eyes flickered open. Got you, she said, dragging him toward the reef. He coughed, sputtered, tried to push her away. I'm fine. You're bleeding, she snapped. Hold still. He looked down. Blood streamed from a gash above his temple. Together, they made it back to the sandbar. The team pulled him out. He was pale, dazed. Ridley tore open a med pouch, pressing gauze to his head. He winced. You should have stayed back. She glared. And leave you to drown, not my style. For the first time, he didn't have a comeback. They sat there, soaked, bruised, waiting for pickup. The sun climbed higher, baking the salt into their skin. Hours later, when the rescue chopper finally arrived, Vienna didn't look at her. Not once. But as they lifted off, she caught him glance her way, brief, quiet, conflicted. Something had shifted. Maybe it was respect, maybe shame, maybe both. Either way, it didn't last. Because what happened next, the debrief, the blame, the accusations, would turn that fragile moment into something darker. And it would end with the sound of a knee cracking against steel, echoing through the armory deck. Why did it always end like this? Not with the blast, not with the fire, but with the paperwork. Ridley sat in the cold metal chair of the debriefing room, the smell of salt and disinfectant still clinging to her uniform. A single light buzzed above her, too bright against the gray steel walls. Across the table sat Captain Marcus Vienna, a gauze pad taped to the cut on his temple. His posture was perfect, arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes hard. He didn't say anything at first. The silence stretched until it started to sound like accusation. Then he spoke. You disobeyed an abort order. Ridley kept her voice calm. I couldn't hear the transmission clearly. Comms were compromised. You heard it well enough to respond. She met his stare. Not until after the first blast. I acted on situational awareness. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. You acted on impulse. That's not the same thing. Hale sat off to the side, hands clasped, watching both of them. Captain, with respect, Cass saved your life out there. If she hadn't gone back in the water. Vienna cut him off. That's not the point. Ridley's voice was steady. Then what is the point? The point, he said slowly, is that one of my operators broke protocol during a live mission and nearly got herself, and others killed. The fact that I'm sitting here doesn't make that decision right. It makes it lucky. His words hit with the weight of command. Cold, deliberate, final. Ridley didn't look away. She didn't defend herself again. Because she knew this wasn't about rules or radio calls. This was about control, about the kind of man who couldn't accept that he'd been saved by the one person he didn't believe in. Hale spoke again, quieter this time. Sir, the mission parameters were incomplete. We all knew the intel was thin. Cass made the right call given what we had. Vienna's gaze flicked toward him, sharp. Noted, Lieutenant, you're dismissed. Hale hesitated. Sir. Dismissed. Hale stood, jaw flexing, then turned and left the room. The door clanged shut behind him. Now it was just the two of them. Vienna exhaled slowly, rubbing the bridge of his nose. You think this is personal, don't you? Ridley didn't answer. He looked at her again, something colder in his eyes now. You think I'm one of those men who can't stand taking orders from a woman? Her pulse ticked once. I don't think about you that much, Captain. He smiled, a small, bitter twist. That's funny, because the entire chain of command seems to think about you plenty. You're the Navy's little miracle. The first to pass Bud S. the poster girl for diversity in combat arms. His voice turned quieter, more deliberate. You want to know what that really means? It means every single failure, every mistake you make becomes proof for the next 5 who think they can do what you did. You don't get to just fail, Cass. You get to ruin the idea of you. She didn't move, didn't blink. And in that silence, she realized something. He wasn't just angry at her. He was afraid of her, of what she represented. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost gentle. Then maybe the idea needs to be tougher. He stared at her, his jaw tightening, the vein in his temple pulsing. Then he pushed back from the table. You're confined to ship until further notice. Debrief complete. Ridley stood, nodded once and left the room. Outside, the corridor felt colder than the sea. She walked in silence, boots echoing off steel. The ship vibrated faintly under her feet, the rhythm of engines she'd come to trust more than people. Down below, in the berthing compartment, the rest of the team was gathered around the mess table, half-eaten MREs scattered across the surface. The laughter died when she entered. They all looked up, some with respect, some with pity. No one said a word. She grabbed a protein bar from her locker, unwrapped it slowly. The metallic crinkle was louder than it should have been. Then one of the younger operators, Petty Officer Rains, cleared his throat. He's blaming you, isn't he? Ridley didn't answer. Rains frowned. That's bull, you pulled him out yourself. She shrugged, doesn't matter. It should. Ridley looked at him, her expression unreadable. Respect doesn't come from fairness, Rains. It comes from repetition. Just keep doing your job, that's all that matters. The mess fell quiet again. Later that night she couldn't sleep. She found herself on the lower deck near the armory where the air smelled of oil and cleaning solvent. The racks of rifles stood in perfect symmetry, each weapon tagged and secured. She sat on a crate, elbows on her knees, staring at nothing. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence. She thought about her father again, about that storm in Alaska. How he'd stood behind her while the boat pitched and rolled, never taking the wheel, never raising his voice. How afterward, when she asked why he didn't help, he'd said, "Because I needed you to learn that no one's coming to steady you." She'd been steady ever since. And yet here she was, shaking not from fear but from something sharper. Humiliation. It wasn't the words Vienna said that hurt. It was the truth underneath them, that no matter what she did, she was still fighting to exist in a space that would always try to erase her. That realization burned worse than any wound. The next morning, orders came down from Fleet Command. The incident would be reviewed. Standard procedure, they said, but rumors spread fast. Some said she'd ignored orders. Others said she'd endangered the team. By the time she entered the mess hall for breakfast, the whispers had already started. Should have followed the abort call. Lucky she didn't drown both of them. She kept walking, tray, coffee, corner seat, same ritual as always. But as she sat down, someone at the next table muttered, "Guess chivalry's dead, she drags him out just to get a medal." The spoon froze halfway to her mouth. She turned slowly, meeting the eyes of the man who'd said it. He looked away. Before she could respond, another voice spoke from behind her. "Enough." It was Hale standing in the doorway. His tone was quiet, but it carried more weight than shouting ever could. The table went silent. He walked over, set his tray down across from her. "Command," calling it procedural review only. You're cleared to continue duties, for now. Ridley nodded, for now. He studied her. You're not sleeping. Neither are you. He smiled faintly, touché. Then he leaned forward. Cass, don't give him what he wants. Vienna wants you emotional, defensive. Don't give him that satisfaction. She nodded again, but her eyes stayed distant. Because what he didn't know, what she hadn't told anyone, was that she'd already been summoned privately by Vienna later that day. And what happened in that meeting would change everything. It started like routine. A maintenance check in the armory. Inventory sign-offs, nothing special. But when she arrived, he was already there alone, sleeves rolled, cleaning a sidearm. The air smelled like CLP and metal. "Close the door," he said without looking up. She did. He set the pistol down carefully, then straightened. "You know, Cass, I read your file again last night. You were the top finisher in your Bud S class for endurance. That right?" "Yes, sir." "Impressive." He stepped closer. "You ever wonder if that makes you reckless?" "No, sir." "Maybe you should." She felt the shift before it happened, the air getting thinner, his tone tightening. "You think the rules don't apply to you," he said. "That your story makes you untouchable, but it doesn't. You screw up, you answer for it. And I don't care how many headlines you make." "I didn't screw up," she said quietly. "That's when it happened." He stepped closer, too close. The space between them vanished. His voice dropped to a hiss. "You don't get to talk back to me, sailor." She didn't move. "Step back, Captain." He didn't. He sneered. "Or what? You'll shoot me." She held his gaze. "No, I'll wait, and I'll let you hang yourself with your own words." That's when his jaw clenched. A flash of something, frustration, ego, something darker crossed his face. And then, in one sharp motion, he shoved past her shoulder, catching her off balance. She stumbled back, hit the corner of the weapons rack, and when she turned, his leg swung out fast, hard, deliberate. His knee connected with her forehead, slamming her against the steel. The sound rang out like a bell. She hit the deck hard. Dazed, the world spun. For a moment, he froze, maybe realizing what he'd just done. Then she looked up, eyes glassy but focused, and whispered, "Now you're the one who just broke protocol." He stepped back, breathing hard, eyes wide. And in that silence, that terrible, suspended second, he understood what every man in her way had eventually learned. That she wouldn't stay down. Not this time. Not ever. How long does a single second last when everything you've built starts to crack? Ridley lay still on the armory floor, the steel cold against her skin, her breath coming in short, controlled bursts. Her head throbbed where the captain's knee had struck her. She blinked once, twice. Her vision cleared slowly, the fluorescent lights above flickering in slow motion. Captain Marcus Wiener stood over her, frozen. His jaw was locked tight, his chest rising and falling fast. There was no triumph on his face, only panic, the kind that flashes when a man realizes he just crossed a line he can't uncross. Neither of them spoke. The silence was deafening. Ridley pushed herself up, one hand steadying against the deck, the other brushing the blood from her eyebrow. She didn't look at him. Not yet. When she finally did, her voice was calm, too calm. "You just assaulted a Navy SEAL in a secure armory." His mouth opened, closed, he couldn't find words. She stood slowly, squaring her shoulders, her posture perfect despite the ache running down her neck. "You think I won't report this?" He swallowed hard, the authority in his stance cracking. "You'll end your career if you do, you know that." She tilted her head, eyes sharp. "Maybe, but you just ended yours." He took a step forward, but she raised her hand, not in defense but in warning. Her tone was steady, almost gentle. "Don't make this worse." Then she turned and walked out, leaving him standing there with his fear. The corridor outside was empty. The hum of the ship's engines felt louder now, like the ocean itself was listening. Ridley's hands trembled slightly as she pressed a tissue to her brow. The cut was small, superficial, but the bruise underneath was already blooming. She walked straight to the medical bay. The corpsman on duty looked up from his clipboard, startled. Petty Officer Cass. She nodded. Accidental impact, training gear needed checked. He gestured to a cot, cleaning supplies ready. Sit down. She did. The antiseptic burned. She didn't flinch. When he asked for details, she said nothing more. Not yet. Because in the Navy, timing was everything. Even truth had to be tactical. Later that night, she stood in front of the mirror in her quarters. The bruise above her eyebrow had deepened to a dull violet. She stared at it quietly. No anger, no self-pity, just calculation. She could report it. She should report it. But she also knew what would happen if she did. An investigation, a whisper campaign, 1,000 quiet questions disguised as curiosity. Was she exaggerating? Did she provoke it? Did she misunderstand? The system didn't need proof to punish. It just needed doubt. Still, something inside her refused to stay silent. She picked up her notepad, the same one she used for mission logs, and wrote, 2100 hours. Assault in Armory by Capt. M. Wiener. Physical contact. Unprovoked. No witnesses. She signed her name, folded the paper, slipped it into her chest pocket. A record, just in case someone tried to erase her truth later. Sleep didn't come that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, not the moment of impact, but the second after. The regret, the fear, the recognition that he just lost control. And underneath it all, she felt something she didn't expect: pity. Not for him. For what men like him became when their authority depended on someone else staying small. By morning, the bruise had darkened, and the whispers started again. Rough night, Cass. Walked into a door. Or did the ocean finally hit back? She ignored them all, moving through her morning drills like nothing had changed. But everything had. At 900, she was summoned to the XO's office. Commander Patel, the executive officer, sat behind a steel desk littered with reports. His eyes were kind but cautious. Sit, Cass. She did. He folded his hands. Captain Wiener submitted a report last night. Claims there was a disciplinary altercation in the armory. He said you were aggressive, that you shoved him first. Ridley blinked once, slowly. That's not what happened. Patel nodded. I figured as much, but protocol requires I document both accounts. Sir, there are no witnesses, just me and him. I know, he hesitated. You want to make a formal statement. She stared at the desk. The hum of the ventilation filled the silence. I do, she said finally. He slid a pad across to her. She took the pen, her hand steady as she wrote the truth in neat, deliberate lines. No emotion, just fact. When she was done, she signed it, slid it back. Patel read it in silence. When he finished, he looked up. You realize what this means, right? Yes, sir. You're alleging misconduct from a commanding officer. Yes, sir. He exhaled. All right, I'll forward it to JAG. They'll handle it from here. She nodded once, stood, saluted, and left the room. The hall outside felt colder than before. By evening, the investigation had already become rumor. Some said she'd struck him. Others said he'd defended himself. Others, that it was just a misunderstanding between two strong personalities. That word, misunderstanding, followed her everywhere. For 3 days, she kept to herself. The men avoided her now, unsure of which side to believe. Even Hale seemed caught between loyalty and survival. He found her one night near the flight deck, leaning against the railing, the ocean stretching out below. I read the report, he said quietly. Of course you did. Cass, he paused. Are you sure you want to fight this? They'll circle the wagons, you know how this works. She turned, eyes steady. If I don't, then I'm telling every woman after me that silence is the price of belonging." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded, "All right." Neither spoke for a while. The night wind whipped across the deck. Then he said, "You know, I used to think strength was about not breaking. Now I think it's about knowing when to stand your ground even if you do." Ridley smiled faintly. "That's a good way to put it." The next morning, JAG officers came aboard. The investigation began: questions, interviews, depositions. Ridley answered each one the same way, calmly, truthfully, without embellishment. Viener denied everything. He claimed she'd provoked him, that she'd stepped too close, that the contact was accidental. His lawyer echoed every word. The review dragged for weeks. During that time, Ridley wasn't assigned missions. She ran drills alone, trained in silence, and ignored the whispers that followed her everywhere she went. "Career suicide," one voice muttered behind her in the corridor. "She should have just let it go," another said. But she didn't let it go. And one evening, when she returned to her quarters, she found an envelope on her bunk. No name, just a folded piece of paper inside. It read, "I saw it from the corridor. You're not crazy, he hit you." Lar. No signature, just an initial. She stared at it for a long time, then tucked it into her locker beside her first note, the one she'd written herself that night in the armory. Two truths now. Two voices against silence. It wasn't enough for the system, but it was enough for her. When the hearing finally came, she stood in front of the review board in full uniform. Her bruise had faded, but the memory hadn't. She told the story once clearly, without hesitation. No theatrics, no tears, just truth. Viener sat across the table, jaw tight, eyes avoiding hers. When she finished, the senior officer asked, "Petty Officer Cass, do you have any final statement?" She thought of Alaska again, of the storm, of her father's voice. She took a breath. "Fear is fine, sir, but letting it turn into abuse is." The boardroom went silent. They adjourned without comment. She walked out into the corridor alone again, but lighter this time, because she'd done what most don't. She refused to carry someone else's shame. That night she found herself back on the deck, staring at the horizon. The sea was calm, the stars sharp, the kind of night that feels like it's holding its breath. She didn't know what the board would decide. Maybe she'd be reassigned. Maybe she'd be discharged. Maybe nothing would change. But deep down, she knew she'd already won something bigger, the right to stand unshaken. And somewhere far below, in the endless dark water, the echo of her father's voice drifted back like a whisper. "Fear's fine, kid. Just don't let it make you stupid." She smiled faintly. "I didn't." What does justice sound like when no one's listening? The boardroom door closed behind her, and for the first time in years, Ridley Cass didn't know what came next. The corridor stretched long and empty, metal humming beneath her boots. Somewhere down the passage, a crewman's laughter echoed, ordinary, indifferent. The ship carried on like it always did, as if nothing had happened. For 3 days, no one spoke to her about the hearing. The command went silent. The team carried on with routine drills, but Ridley was kept off the duty roster. She still trained, running laps, maintaining weapons, cleaning gear that wouldn't be used. Discipline was the only thing that made sense. She'd done everything right, told the truth, stayed calm, let the system work. But every hour that passed without an answer felt heavier. On the 4th morning, she was summoned to the XO's office again. Commander Patel stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, the ocean beyond the glass burning white under the sun. "Sit down, Cass." She obeyed, expression unreadable. He turned. There was exhaustion in his eyes, the kind that came from living between duty and conscience. The review board reached a conclusion. She didn't speak, she just waited. They're classifying it as a mutual altercation. No disciplinary action for either party. The words hit harder than the knee ever had. She blinked once. A mutual altercation, she repeated, each syllable deliberate. Yes. So I was assaulted by my superior officer, but it's being written up as a disagreement. Patel's jaw tightened. It's the compromise they settled on. It keeps the record clean. No one loses rank. No one faces charges. The Navy avoids scandal. Ridley's voice stayed level, but the steel underneath it sharpened. So the truth is optional now. Patel sighed. Cass, I know what happened. Everyone who matters knows, but you need to understand the Navy protects itself first. She nodded slowly. I understand, sir. He hesitated. You can appeal, but unofficially I'd advise against it. The longer this drags on, the harder your career gets. She stood, permission to speak freely. Granted. Sir, I didn't join to protect the Navy. I joined to protect the people in it. Patel's expression softened, regret flickering for just a moment. I know, and that's why this hurts. He dismissed her with a nod, but as she turned to leave, he said quietly, For what it's worth, some of us are proud of you. Ridley didn't look back. Pride didn't pay for silence. Outside, the passageway smelled of oil and seawater. The air felt thicker now, the kind that presses against the chest and makes you want to disappear. But she didn't disappear. She showed up for PT, ran with the team, ate in the same mess hall, answered the same radio checks. Every look that followed her felt like static, but she didn't break rhythm. She refused to be erased. The rumor mill shifted shape by the day. Some said she got Viener demoted. Others said she'd made the whole thing up. Truth was just noise now, drowned out by opinion. One afternoon, as she was cleaning her rifle on the deck, Raines approached, the youngest operator, the one who used to joke too much but never at her expense. He hovered for a moment before sitting down across from her. He's getting reassigned, he said quietly. Ridley didn't look up. Viener. He nodded. Transferred to Norfolk, administrative post. Of course. Raines hesitated. They said it's voluntary. Nothing in this world is voluntary, she said softly. He looked down, fiddling with the sling of his weapon. For what it's worth, ma'am, I believe you. She paused, then met his eyes. Why? He shrugged. Because I saw the way you looked when you came out of that armory. I've seen fear before. That wasn't fear. That was control. The kind people only learn after surviving something worse. Ridley held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once. Thank you. When he left, she stared at the rifle laid out before her, the perfect symmetry of it, the precision of every part. Machines made sense. They didn't lie. They didn't need stories. That night she went topside again. The sea was calm, the stars sharp enough to cut. She leaned on the railing, letting the salt wind sting her face. She thought about writing the story down, not the sanitized version the Navy filed, but the truth. The one no one wanted, but she didn't. Not yet. Because she realized the truth wasn't a weapon you used for revenge. It was one you carried for the ones who'd need it later. The next morning, orders came in. Deployment rotation. The platoon would be returning stateside within 2 weeks. No one mentioned the incident again. Not Hale, not the command, not Viener. It vanished, buried under new assignments, new missions, new distractions. But silence leaves echoes. On her last day aboard the Michael Monser, Ridley walked through the lower decks one final time, past the gym, past the armory, past the corridor where she'd once stood bleeding and unbowed. At the armory hatch she stopped. The same room, same lights, different air. She stepped inside. The smell of oil and CLP hit her like memory. The racks were empty, weapons checked out for inspection. Only her reflection stared back from the steel surface of the locker door. She pressed her fingers against it, just a whisper of touch. For a moment she saw herself the way he must have seen her, small, quiet, out of place. And then she realized that's what scared him most. Not her strength, but her silence. Because silence, when it refuses to yield, becomes defiance. She left the armory with her head high, her steps light, and something heavier lifted from her chest. When they docked in Bahrain for turnover, she packed her gear methodically. Rifle, uniform, letters. At the bottom of her locker, she found the two folded notes, her written statement and the anonymous one that had confirmed it. She stared at them for a long moment before sliding them into a small waterproof case and tucking it inside her duffel. Not for revenge, for memory. She was the first to board the transport flight home. The others trickled in slowly. Hale gave her a nod as he passed, not the casual kind, but the quiet kind that says you did something the rest of us weren't brave enough to. When the engines roared to life, Ridley looked out the small oval window. The ship grew smaller below, its gray hull gleaming under the sun. She thought about the ocean, how it takes everything you throw at it and gives nothing back but reflection. Maybe that was the lesson. The plane leveled off at altitude. She closed her eyes. For the first time in weeks, she slept. When she woke, they were flying over a coastline, green fields giving way to gray cities. Home. The debriefs were routine. The commendations were formal. Her name appeared on a list for reassignment to Coronado Training Division. No field missions. A pause, they said. Time to rest. She didn't argue. At the base, life slowed down. Days filled with drills, classrooms, lectures on tactics and leadership. She watched fresh recruits struggle through their first days of Bud S, the fear in their eyes, the tremble in their hands. She saw herself in them, younger, hungrier, full of fire. One evening, after a long training cycle, a young woman approached her. Barely 20, hair tied back, uniform still stiff with newness. "Ma'am," she said, "they told me you're Petty Officer Cass." Ridley nodded. "That's me." The recruit hesitated. "I just wanted to say I heard about what happened, about the hearing." Ridley's face didn't change. "What did you hear?" "That you stood your ground," the recruit said. "That you didn't let them silence you." Ridley studied her, saw the nerves in her shoulders, the hope she was trying not to show. "Who told you that?" she asked. The recruit smiled slightly. "Everyone who needed to." Ridley didn't reply for a moment. Then she said softly, "Keep your head down, learn fast, and remember silence can protect you or destroy you. Know which one you're choosing." "Yes, ma'am." When the recruit left, Ridley sat alone in the empty classroom, the sun setting through the blinds. Dust drifted in golden light. She exhaled, long and slow. For the first time since the armory, she didn't feel angry. She didn't feel broken, just steady. Maybe that was enough. Because dignity doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. It just endures, one quiet act at a time. And as the base lights flickered on outside, Ridley realized the truth her father had always lived by but never said out loud. Courage isn't loud. It's the sound of someone who stays standing after the world tells them to kneel. How long can peace last when it was never what you wanted? Ridley Cass had been in Coronado for 6 months. 6 months of order, repetition, and silence. Every day began at 4:30 with the same whistle, the same salt air drifting over the training compound, the same sound of boots hitting sand. She taught new candidates how to breathe underwater without panic, how to march without rhythm, how to suffer without noise. They respected her but didn't know her. To them she was a rumor in human form, the woman who'd passed Bud S, the one whose name was whispered during surf torture like a prayer or a dare. None of them mentioned the hearing. None dared. Her office was small, window facing the Pacific. On the desk sat her trident, polished but never displayed. She'd earned it once with blood, once with silence. Some days she wondered which was harder. Then one Thursday afternoon, a knock came at her door. "Enter," she said. Lieutenant Hale stepped in. Same steady eyes, a little more gray at the temples. He looked out of place among the recruits, too weathered, too real. She stood automatically. "Sir." He smiled faintly. "You don't have to sir me anymore. I'm off active rotation, desk duty now." Since when? Since the Gulf of Aden turned into a paperwork factory. He sat on the edge of the chair. Heard they stuck you here. How's training life? Predictable. After what you've seen, maybe that's not a bad thing. Ridley studied him. You didn't drive 2 hours just to reminisce. No, he admitted. He slid a manila envelope across her desk. This came through my channels. Figured you'd want to see it before it disappears. She opened it carefully. Inside, printed orders, transfer logs, and a brief memo stamped confidential. Her eyes froze on the name. Captain Marcus Viener, reassignment. Naval Special Warfare Training Command, Bahrain Detachment. She looked up. They sent him back into the field. Hale nodded grimly. Different command name, same work, overseas again. Only this time he's not alone. He reached into his jacket and placed a second photo beside the file. A grainy satellite still of a port facility, containers stacked like tombstones. A civilian logistics ship was seized outside Djibouti last month. Intel says Viener's unit is running security oversight. 2 hostages. One of them's an American engineer with classified clearance. Command wants a small advisory team to assist local response forces. They specifically requested you. Ridley's jaw tightened. Requested. By name. She leaned back in her chair. This is retaliation dressed as opportunity. Maybe it's redemption. I can't tell the difference anymore. The room went quiet. Outside, candidates shouted cadence. Inside, only the hum of the overhead light. Hale lowered his voice. Look, Cass, I know what happened, we all do, but this mission, this is clean. No politics, no headlines. You go do the job, come home, that's it. She stared at the photo again. The cargo yard looked eerily familiar, angles of steel and shadow that dragged her back to that night on the Arcturus. She could almost hear the wind again, the whisper of rope through gloves. I told myself I was done, she said softly. Maybe you are, Hale replied, but the Navy isn't done with you. He left the envelope on her desk and stood. Think about it, 48 hours, they'll need an answer. After he left, Ridley sat for a long time without moving. The sunlight on the desk shifted, creeping across the file until it touched her hand. She flipped open the mission outline. Extraction, hostage recovery, limited engagement. Nothing she hadn't done before, but the name Viener glared like a wound that refused to close. That night she walked down to the shoreline after lights out. The surf hissed against the sand, cold water running over her boots. She stared at the horizon, the dark seam where ocean met sky. Some part of her still believed in service, the idea that you could do good inside a broken system if you stayed clean yourself. Another part knew that ideals didn't stop bullets or bureaucracy. But this wasn't about the Navy anymore. It was about unfinished business. She whispered into the wind, if I go back, it's not for him. The waves didn't answer, but the decision settled anyway. 2 days later, she was in Bahrain, the heat hitting like a hammer the moment she stepped off the transport. The air tasted of dust and jet fuel. The forward operations base buzzed with noise, rotors, radios, shouting Marines. Inside the command tent, she found Viener immediately. Even at a distance, he looked smaller than she remembered, thinner, the confidence worn down around the edges. He was briefing a group of local security officers, voice tight, movements clipped. When he saw her, the words caught in his throat. The room went still. Petty Officer Cass, he said finally, formal, almost mechanical. Didn't expect you'd accept the assignment. I didn't do it for expectations. He nodded once, eyes flicking away. You're attached as technical advisor. I'm team lead. We keep this professional. Wouldn't know how else to do it, she replied. The tension in the air was surgical, clean, sharp, sterile. Neither raised their voice. Neither blinked first. The briefing continued. The target, a rusting freighter docked outside the harbor, pirates using it as cover for smuggling weapons. 2 hostages locked below deck. The operation would unfold at dawn. Simple, except nothing ever was. After the meeting, Vienna approached her outside the tent. The desert wind blew sand between them. "Cass," he said quietly, "about before Coronado the hearing." She stopped him with a glance. "We're not doing this." He hesitated. "You still think I'm the enemy?" "I don't think about you at all." He nodded, jaw tight. "Then let's keep it that way." They didn't speak again that night. At 400, the team boarded 2 rigid-hull boats. The sea was black glass, the horizon bruised with early light. Ridley sat near the bow, rifle across her lap, headset humming with radio static. The freighter loomed ahead, silent, skeletal, lights dead. As they closed in, Ridley's instincts prickled. Something felt off. Too quiet, too empty. "Thermals show no movement topside," Vienna reported. "Or they're waiting below," she murmured. He heard it. "You questioning the plan already?" "I'm reading the water." Before he could reply, the first crack of gunfire ripped through the dark. Tracers slashed from the deck of the freighter. One of the lead boats veered hard, smoke blossoming from its stern. "Ambush!" The air exploded with noise. Ridley dropped flat, returning fire, the muzzle flashes painting her hands white. The second boat rammed against the hull. She leapt up, grapple hook spinning through the air, catching the railing. Climbing, boots slipping, breath steady. Above her, Vienna was already on the ladder. Rounds sparked off the steel beside him. He turned, shouting something she couldn't hear, then his footing gave way. The cable snapped. He fell backward, disappearing into the black water below. For one heartbeat she froze, then instinct took over. She unclipped, dove after him. The water swallowed her whole, cold, heavy, silent. Through the bubbles she saw his silhouette sinking, weighed down by gear. She kicked hard, grabbed his harness and dragged him upward. Her lungs burned, her muscles screaming. They broke the surface gasping. He coughed, eyes wide. "You again," he rasped. "Yeah," she said, voice hoarse. "Try not to make this a habit." They swam toward the side ladder as covering fire cracked above. She hauled him up first, then climbed after. Together they breached the lower deck, moving through narrow corridors slick with oil and seawater. Shouts echoed ahead, 2 voices, foreign, panicked. They moved as one, clearing corners, communicating in glances. Training took over. Whatever stood between them, anger, history, guilt, fell away in the rhythm of survival. They found the hostages in a storage bay, hands bound, terrified but alive. Ridley cut them free while Vienna secured the exit. The firefight above was fading now. The rest of the team was pushing through. When it was done and the ship was secure, Vienna slumped against a bulkhead, soaked and shaking. He looked at her for a long time, then said quietly, "Why'd you save me?" Ridley wiped water from her eyes. "Because I don't get to choose who deserves it." He nodded slowly. "I lied in that hearing," he said. The words came out raw, like something tearing. "You were right about everything, I couldn't face it." She didn't answer. The truth didn't need her help anymore. When the extraction boat arrived, she looked back at the freighter one last time, its rusted deck glowing faintly in the sunrise. Maybe this was closure. Maybe it was just another circle closing on itself. On the ride back to shore, neither spoke. The sea was calm again, indifferent as ever. Ridley watched the horizon and thought about something her father had said the day she left Alaska. "The ocean doesn't hate you, kid. It just doesn't care whether you make it." She understood now. The world wasn't cruel or kind. It just waited to see who kept swimming. And she still was. Why did silence feel louder after the shooting stopped? The freighter was secure, the hostages safe, and yet the air still hummed with something unfinished. The sun was climbing, bright enough now to burn away the fog that had hidden everything only an hour earlier. Ridley Cass sat on the gunwale of the extraction boat, helmet off, hair plastered with salt, staring at the horizon. Each wave shimmered gold, like nothing bad had ever happened there. Across from her, Captain Marcus Viener pressed a bandage against his shoulder where a fragment had grazed him. He looked smaller than he had in the briefing tents, tired, ordinary, mortal. The men around them spoke in low tones, inventorying weapons, radioing status updates. No one mentioned what they'd all seen, Ridley diving into the dark water after the very man who once tried to erase her. He finally broke the silence. "You could have let me drown." Ridley didn't look at him. Could have. Would have been easier. Maybe for me, not for you. He gave a weak laugh, wincing at the pain in his ribs. "You always did have a talent for impossible choices." She turned then, meeting his eyes. "No, just a habit of doing what's right when it costs too much." He looked away. The engine roared, drowning whatever he was about to say. Back at base, the debrief was clinical. 2 hostiles confirmed dead, both hostages recovered, minimal friendly casualties. The operation would read like success in a report, clean lines, clear outcome, nothing messy left behind. But the truth never fit on paper. It lived in the spaces between words, in the things people refused to say aloud. Ridley handed in her rifle, logged her equipment, signed her name on the dotted line one last time. The clerk glanced up at her trident, then back down at the form, eyes full of curiosity he didn't voice. Everyone knew her story by now. They just didn't know how to look her in the eye while carrying it. Outside the hangar, Viener waited. The bandage on his shoulder had already bled through. He looked like a man rehearsing an apology he didn't know how to give. "Cass," he said. She stopped a few feet away. He searched for words, failed once, then tried again. "Back there, you didn't just save me. You saved my command, and I can't undo what I did to you." Ridley folded her arms. "You don't need to, just don't repeat it." He nodded slowly. "You know the board will call this a joint success. I'll make sure your name's first on the citation." "I don't need a citation." "Maybe not, but you deserve one." She almost smiled. "What I deserve doesn't fit in a paragraph." He flinched at that, because he knew it was true. They stood there in the harsh daylight, 2 soldiers who had finally run out of enemies except the ghosts behind their own eyes. Then Viener said quietly, "You were right back then, about fear. I let mine make me stupid." Ridley studied him for a moment. "Then maybe we're finally even." He gave a small nod, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the noise of generators and rotors. For the first time since she'd met him, he didn't look back. That night, Ridley sat alone on the pier, boots dangling above the dark water. The air was thick with diesel and salt. She could still feel the bruise on her forehead from months ago, though the skin had long healed. Some wounds did that. They stayed invisible, waiting to remind you who you used to be. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket, the anonymous note from the hearing, the one signed only R. She carried it halfway around the world. She unfolded it slowly, reading the single sentence again. "I saw it from the corridor. You're not crazy, he hit you." She didn't know who had written it, and maybe that was the point. Maybe truth didn't need a face to matter. She tore the paper once, twice, until it fell into the sea like confetti. The tide swallowed it without a sound. For a long time she just listened to the water, the far-off hum of aircraft, the faint echo of her own breathing. Then she whispered, half prayer, half promise, "I'm still here." The words vanished into the wind, but left a calm behind. The official commendation came 3 weeks later. A letter from Fleet Command, measured praise, nothing sentimental. Exemplary initiative under fire. Outstanding marksmanship. Leadership in crisis. She read it once, folded it, and tucked it into a drawer with the others. The Navy liked tidy endings. She'd learned not to expect them. Hale called her that evening. The connection crackled with static. "Heard about Bahrain," he said. "Good work." "Thanks." "Viener's resigning. Medical leave first, then out for good. He put in a recommendation with your name on it." Ridley almost laughed. Guilt's a powerful motivator. "Maybe, Or maybe he finally learned something. She looked out her window at the waves rolling under moonlight. You think people really change, Hale? He paused. Some do. The rest get reminded until they do. After the call, she packed slowly. Orders had come in, stateside reassignment, intelligence liaison. It meant she'd finally be off the water for a while. Part of her was relieved. Part of her already missed the smell of salt and metal. Some addictions never left, they just went quiet. Before she turned out the light, she took the trident from her desk and held it in her palm. It felt heavier than it used to, as if every mission, every silence, every choice had welded itself into the metal. She whispered, "You don't earn this once. You earn it every day you refuse to break." Then she set it down again. Her flight home lifted off at dawn. From the window she could see the desert fatting beneath the clouds, the sea stretching endless beyond it. She thought about all the versions of herself she'd left scattered across oceans and battlefields. The girl who'd refused to ring the bell, the operator who'd been doubted, the woman who'd stood alone in a room full of men and told the truth anyway. They were all still out there, pieces of armor she no longer needed. Somewhere between altitude and sunrise, she drifted into a light sleep. She dreamed she was back in Alaska, standing at the helm of her father's fishing boat, the waves slamming against the bow, the world nothing but gray water and wind. He was beside her, older than she remembered, eyes calm. He didn't speak at first. Then he said, the way he always had, "Fear's fine, kid." She smiled in the dream, "I know." Then stop steering against it. Let it carry you where you need to go. When she woke, the plane was descending, sunlight spilling through the windows like forgiveness. Landing felt like stepping into a new gravity. Coronado shimmered in heat, gulls circling above the runway. Ridley walked down the tarmac with nothing but one duffel and the faint ache of belonging to too many places at once. Inside the terminal, a group of young recruits waited for transport, fresh faces, anxious energy. One of them recognized her and straightened unconsciously. She gave a small nod as she passed. That was enough. They didn't need her story, they just needed to know it could be done. Outside, she paused by the chain-link fence where the wind from the ocean hit hardest. The horizon looked the same as the day she'd first left it, endless, indifferent, waiting. She breathed it in. She learned that strength wasn't about never falling. It was about choosing what to stand for when you got back up. She adjusted the strap of her duffel, turned toward the barracks, and started walking. Her pace was steady, unhurried. Each step sounded like closure. And somewhere behind the rhythm of her boots came the faintest echo of her father's voice, carried by the wind across the Pacific. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Ridley smiled. That was all she needed to hear. What do you do when the fight finally stops following you? For months after Bahrain, Ridley Cass lived in a kind of hush. The Navy parked her at a joint training liaison office north of San Diego, half administrative, half mentorship, safely away from gunfire and headlines. Most days began with coffee before sunrise and ended with the ocean glowing copper through her window. She still kept her boots polished, still rose before reveille, still checked the locks twice before sleeping. Habits were the last things war surrendered. At first the quiet unnerved her. No engines, no adrenaline, no voices crackling in her ear. Just her breath and the small noises of normal life. The whir of an air conditioner, the squeak of the coffee maker, distant laughter from the flight line. It felt like standing inside a seashell hearing echoes of a world that no longer existed. Then the new candidates started showing up. Men and women, some barely 20, some already worn from deployments, assigned to her for evaluation before advanced selection. They called her ma'am or chief depending on rumor. Most were nervous, all had heard something. Stories mutate fast in uniform. Ridley didn't correct them, she just trained them. She taught the small things no manual printed, how to read a teammate's silence, how to breathe through panic, how to tell the difference between pride and ego. She rarely raised her voice. When she did, people listened. Not because she shouted, but because she didn't waste words. One afternoon, a knock sounded on her office door. "Come in," she said. A young recruit stepped inside, mid-twenties, wiry, freckles bright against sunburnt skin. The name tape read Mendoza. She'd seen him on the obstacle course earlier that week, struggling through the log carry, refusing to quit even after his knee buckled. "Permission to speak, Chief?" he asked. "Go ahead." He hesitated. "They told me you were involved in that incident a few years back with Captain Viener." Ridley looked up from her paperwork, and "I just wanted to know how you kept serving after that, after the system didn't back you." The question wasn't bold, it was honest. She set the pen down. "You serve the people beside you, Mendoza, not the system. The uniform's just fabric, the oath, what matters." He frowned. "So you still trust it, the oath?" She considered that. "I don't trust it to protect me. I trust it to remind me who I'm supposed to be." He nodded slowly. "Thank you, Chief." When he left, she caught her reflection in the dark window, older now, lines where once there were only scars. For the first time, she saw peace instead of proof. Spring drifted into summer. Coronado baked under salt haze. Ridley ran the candidates through surf drills at dawn, her voice cutting through wind and water. "Fear's fine," she told them as they shivered in the cold surf. "Use it. Don't let it use you." Most of them smiled, without knowing they were hearing an inheritance. That evening, after the last class cleared, she walked the length of the pier. Seagulls wheeled overhead. The sky bled pink into the Pacific. She carried a small wooden box under one arm, the kind issued for medals. Inside lay her trident, the Bahrain citation, and a single photo of her father holding a fish nearly bigger than she was. She sat at the end of the pier, opened the box, and traced the trident with her thumb. 4 points. 4 promises: courage, honor, integrity, perseverance. She kept them all, even when the Navy hadn't kept her. She could retire now if she wanted. No one would blame her. But she wasn't done, not with fighting, but with teaching others how not to break the way she once almost did. She smiled faintly, whispering into the wind, "I made it, Dad." The waves answered with their usual indifference. A month later, the base hosted a Joint Forces symposium. Brass, instructors, old veterans pretending not to cry at the anthem. Ridley stood near the back, dress blues immaculate, hands behind her. When the program ended, a familiar voice spoke behind her. "You still hate ceremonies." She turned. Lieutenant Hale, now Commander Hale, looked almost the same except for a new ring on his finger and more gray in his beard. "Only when they last longer than the war," she said. He chuckled. "You're a legend now, you know. Legends are just people someone stopped arguing with." He grinned. "You ever think about writing it down, everything that happened?" "I already did," she said, "just not for the public." "Then who for?" "For whoever needs to remember that silence doesn't mean surrender." He nodded, understanding. They promoted Viener post-departure honors, humanitarian citation for Bahrain. Ridley didn't flinch. Good for him. "You don't sound angry." "I'm not. Anger's a leash. I'm finally done being led." They stood together watching the sunset burn down behind the runway. Hale said quietly, "You ever miss the noise?" "Every day," she admitted, "but the quiet hurts less." He smiled, offered a salute, and walked away. She watched until he vanished into the crowd. Weeks later, an envelope arrived at her desk. No return address, just military mail markings. Inside was a small note written in neat block letters. "For what it's worth, you were right about everything. M. Viener." Below the words lay a single polished trident pin. Not hers, his. She turned it over in her hand. The metal caught the light, glinting like the surface of a wave. Then she set it beside her own on the desk, 2 identical symbols that meant entirely different things. For the first time in years, she felt something close to forgiveness. Not approval, not forgetfulness, just release. The kind that lets you breathe again. She locked both pins in the wooden box. Some truths didn't need display cases, they just needed rest. On her final evening at Coronado before transferring to instructor command full-time, she walked the beach alone. The recruits had long gone. The sand was cool beneath her boots. She stopped where the surf reached her ankles and looked out over the black water. She thought of every storm she'd survived, the literal ones and the human kind. Thought of the men who doubted her, the ones who believed, the ones who learned too late that respect isn't something you grant, it's something you recognize. She remembered the girl steering her father's boat through the Alaskan gale, terrified but steady. That girl had no idea she'd end up here, halfway across the world, still steering through waves, still refusing to quit. Ridley crouched, let the tide wash over her hands and whispered, "It's enough." The ocean didn't answer. It never did. But she felt the quiet shift inside her, something closing, something opening. She stood, brushed the sand from her palms, and turned toward the lights of the compound. In the distance, she could hear the faint rhythm of cadets running in formation, their voices rising and falling in unison. Life continuing. The mission, in its own way, accomplished. As she walked back, she realized that redemption isn't loud or cinematic. It's a steady heartbeat returning to normal after years of running too fast. It's knowing you can finally stop fighting without feeling like you've lost. At the gate she paused, looked up at the stars breaking through the coastal haze, and smiled. A small, private smile that no one saw. Because sometimes survival isn't a victory shout. Sometimes it's just a whisper that says, "I'm still here." And as the night folded around her, Ridley Cass carried that whisper with her into the dark, steady as breath, quiet as dignity itself.